Welcome to J Life with Daniel. I'm your host, Rabbi Daniel Levine. Today, we are here with Professor Shai Davidai, who has been probably the most prolific pro-Israel professor on an American college campus since October 7th. So, Shai, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Danielle. You know what? I've been thinking about something. Do you mind if I
Oh, please, go for it.
out here? I've been described so many times in the past 15 months as pro-Israel, and it always rubs me the wrong way. Not that I'm not pro-Israel. Of course, I'm pro-Israel. But it seems to me like an identifier that I don't really need because I'm Israeli. What would people expect me to be other than pro my country and my people, right? It's like saying that you, as being in UC Irvine, are pro UC Irvine. Like, of course you'd be pro. Like, why would you be against who you are?
No, it's a great point. It's funny because I was actually thinking about this. The Amcha initiative put out their list of, top campuses for anti-Zionist faculty. I think both Columbia and UC Irvine are two campuses, made the top 10. And a lot of the worst offenders, both on the top 10, are actually Israeli. And so I think it actually is interesting that, and we can talk about academia, because I think it's a very interesting point to go. A lot of the most prominent, outspoken Israelis in America are actually radical anti-Zionists, in different humanities departments. And so, that's the only reason why I give the signifier.
No, you're absolutely right, and it's not about you. Like, everybody uses that signifier, and we can talk about that. There's reasons for that with these anti-Zionist professors. But I would say if we get used to calling people pro X or pro Y, we're treating this like a sports game, right? And I've been saying this a lot. People, and I'll keep saying it until people understand I am pro-Israel. I'm also pro-Palestine in the sense that I believe that Palestinian people deserve self-determination and respect. One does not come at the expense of the other. I am against terrorism, right? And I think I would rather be described as Zionist professor, because that's who I am. And I think that really is the distinction between being Zionist and anti-Zionist, rather than pro-Israel or anti-whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I really like that distinction. And I think I agree. Just it's become such a binary. And it's funny because I'm curious if you agree with this classification. In the Jewish community, it's such a range, right? So if somebody tells me they're a Zionist or pro-Israel, I actually know very little about them, right? Like, I actually have no idea what you think about Bibi Netanyahu. I have no idea what you think about settlements. I have no idea what you think about, the Rabbanut in Israel. But it's very interesting that everybody gets squashed into this, oh, you're a Zionist professor. And, yeah.
That's an interesting, for me, so I'm happy to tell you all of what I believe in. I don't hide anything. It's people who've been following me know. But I would say it doesn't matter. If you go around and ask people, are you an American patriot? Maybe in academia, unfortunately, not a lot of people would say they're patriots, but that's a different problem. Most Americans would say, yeah, I'm a patriot. It doesn't matter if they voted for Trump or for Kamala Harris or didn't vote. They are a patriot. It doesn't matter if they agree with the Supreme Court or disagree with the Supreme Court. They are a patriot. Me being a Zionist is irrelevant to what I believe about the current government in Israel, the previous government, the future government. I'm a Zionist because I believe that Israel has a right to exist and a right to defend itself and to continue existing. That's it.
Yeah, so let's start with, I guess we could start broad and then we'll narrow in on your specific story because I think it's interesting. I'm going to guess most of my listeners have probably heard of you just because there's probably a lot of overlapping interest. What do you think is broken, in the most general sense on campuses that specifically, you've obviously been at Columbia for years. Why are the top universities in America? I'm sure you've gotten this question every interview you've had, but what's happening? Places like Columbia and Harvard or UCLA or UC Irvine, where I'm at, should be attracting the brightest minds, the most critical thinkers, people that see a complex binary issue and, pro-Israel and pro-Palestine. And I expect specifically the students and faculty at Columbia to be the ones to say, listen, it's more complicated than black and white. The world is full of gray areas. Universities should have been the bastion of reason in the last year and a half when society was crumbling, but we've sort of seen the opposite. So I'm curious if you have, is there a specific thing you think is the problem? Is it sort of just a mush? And I'm curious if you can diagnose from your perspective of why.
Yeah, There's a lot of different reasons, and we can go into the details and the specifics. Obviously, I know a lot about what's happening at Columbia. That's where I've been in the past 5 years. I know what's happening at Cornell, where I got my PhD, the New School, where I worked before Columbia. Like, we can talk about the details. But if you really had to narrow it down to two things that are wrong and absolutely dysfunctional in American academia. And when I say American, it's not just the US, it's also Canadian universities. It's no diversity and no accountability. Now, what do I mean by that? If I say no diversity, it's not that I mean not no diversity in terms of skin color or in terms of gender or in terms of nationality, although we have much more things to go and work to make this better and more diverse. What I mean is there's no diversity of thought, of true, clear, critical thinking. If you want to say uh, something about the current president, President Biden. And if you're going to be critical about him, you're likely going to find very few people that will be critical with you. If you want to say something about the coming president, President Trump, President-elect Trump, you will find, and you'll be critical, you will find basically 95% of the people agreeing with you. That is lack of thought diversity. If you want to say something about how abortion is wrong, which, by the way, I personally disagree with, and I'll put in for some nuance there, but in broad strokes, personally disagree with, you will find no one who will agree with you on campus. If you're going to say that, in very broad strokes, abortion is right, then you will find 99% of people agreeing with you. That is no thought diversity. That's a problem because universities are not supposed to be a monolith of thought. They're supposed to be a place where clashing ideas, fight against each other until we get the closest to the truth we can. So that's the diversity piece. The other part is the no accountability. Right now, there are certain things that you can do on university campuses in US and Canada that you will have no consequences. What are those things? You can call for the destruction of the only state that is a safe haven for Jewish people, and you will have no accountability, no consequences. You can call for Jews that refuse to denounce their identity to be removed from campus, and there will be no consequences. And you can stand in the middle of campus, Columbia campus, put down the American flag, burn it, take down your pants, and defecate on it, and there will be completely no accountability. Now, I'm sorry if I'm being graphic, but that is the state of universities right now in the United States and Canada.
I think, I mean, all this culminates in just an obvious lack of trust in institutions. I mean, I've just talked to so many professors, many that won't admit it publicly, but that privately tell me that their academic fields of study are just so much less glamorized than they were, 30, 40 years ago. I mean, some of the humanities are the obvious ones, but even sociology, political science, anthropology, comparative literature, where even professors that tend to be liberal or progressive will bemoan the fact that they're almost seen as a, satirical, a satire of themselves in some of these fields for what they're putting out. And it almost seems like this intractable problem. And the way that I've started thinking about it is, you have obviously this very robust system of who gets tenure and who doesn't at these universities. And the way that you get tenure is basically a vote of who's in the department. And so there's almost a self-selection for people that have the same views. And so it's almost impossible to break into specific fields if you don't share the party line, because before you get tenure, why would you want to try to challenge the status quo in, a variety of fields? And so it just seems like something's broken. There's been obviously a couple of attempts to fix it, ranging from, top down, some universities that are actually going in and, talking about removing tenure to the creation of new universities, like what's happening in Austin, all the way to, a lot of the policies that Florida's had. I mean, I'm just curious. I mean, do you think any of these will work? I mean, what is Columbia, just as one of the elite private schools in our country, what do they need to do so that in 5 years from now, they're not sort of a satire of themselves?
So, I think part of the lack of accountability, and in a sense, the lack of the thought diversity, is the tenure system that I have become completely disillusioned with. Tenure is supposedly a good idea. It's supposed to help people take away the chains of fear of what will come next. Will I have a job in 2 years? Will my colleagues dislike me if I put out this specific thing onto the world? And encourage researchers to come and explore new radical ideas. What it has become is basically the cesspool of stagnation. People, and you can look at, when are people most prolific in their research? Is it before they get tenure or after they get tenure? Well, it's clearly before. I have seen so many colleagues. Some of them are still being paid hundreds of thousands of dollars by Columbia University to this day, publishing one paper a year. And that paper is a rephrasing of what they published the year before, which was a rephrasing of what they published the year before. And I'll tell you why they're publishing that paper: in order for them to get their summer bonus. So the whole system needs to be completely rethought and shifted. Now, that's the university angle. But there's a different, other bigger problem, which is academia broadly constructed, right? Because when we talk about academia, it's not just universities, it's also academic societies, right? This past week, the American Association of Historians voted, I think it was 85%, that what is happening in Gaza is a genocide. Now, put aside the fact that genocide has a definition, and what we are seeing does not fit that definition. And when reality does not fit a definition, you do not change a definition so it fits your narrative. Let's put that aside for a second. No one asked you, American historians, what you think about what's happening today, right? Your field is about observing history through archives, through historical records. When academic institutions, when academic societies are overstepping what they are supposed to do, they become a satire, right? When people ask me what my thoughts are about what's happening in Israel and in Gaza, as an individual, I'm happy to tell them, you and I and everyone else have, we have opinions and we should share our opinions. But when people ask me as a professor, I tell them, I have a PhD in social psychology. I can tell you about the social psychology of what's happening, but I cannot tell you about anything else because that will be academic malpractice. What can we
Yeah, one of the things, I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned the social psychological element. One of the things, I was actually at a synagogue last night talking about, Israel post October 7th. And obviously, everyone inevitably asked me about what's happening on campus, even as much as I, oftentimes don't want to just talk about this all day. And one of the things that I've been saying, at various, Jewish community speeches over the last year and a half, that's, much to the chagrin of a lot of people there, is they're sort of asking, okay, why are so many college students, joining against Israel? And, I talk about some of the different ideological groups that make up of it. But then I say, if I was 18 and knew nothing about this, I probably would have been in the encampment as well. And, I get a lot of stunned looks. And then I say, listen, if you don't know what's going on, this looks like a blast, right? I mean, I don't know what it was like at Columbia. I saw some videos at UC Irvine. I mean, there were barbecues, the outside, wider Islamic community was bringing snacks every day. There were all these tents. I mean, this was California, so the weather was great every single day. I mean, it looked great. There was music. They had this feeling that they were, this group cohesion and being able to rise and do something that's bigger than them. And to compare that with the average daily experience of a student, which is, going around looking at your phone, being overly stressed because you have tests. So can you talk a little bit about that, from what you actually do study academically? Do you think that does capture the majority of it? Obviously, there are sort of the more radical elements, both on the far left and also in the, global Islamic community that are sort of pushing this more from an ideological lens. But it does seem like your average 19-year-old last year was just getting caught up in sort of groupthink and, this sort of, losing themselves to the crowd.
Definitely. I think you're absolutely right. So if we look at the individuals, the leaders of this movement, and they are in the few dozens in every university, let's say 50, maybe top 100. They tend to be really radicalized individuals. What do I mean by that? They have been indoctrinated by their professors. They have they dedicated a lot of time reading and watching biased news reports. And we can argue about what counts as bias or not bias, but when your main source of information is Qatari funded, state funded news agencies, then you're inevitably going to get a biased view. Those are the leaders, and their hearts are hateful. Now, no one is born hateful, so that's why I say they are radicalized rather than radical. They have been radicalized through the process. But those are not the vast majority of the protesters. The protesters, like you say, are 18, 19, 20-year-old college students who, for the first time in their lives, are living away from home. They are, for the first time in their lives, forced to deal with the realities of life, meaning cook for themselves or make sure that they eat 3 meals a day, see a doctor and schedule those, meet the doctor appointments, do everything that an adult does in a scary new environment where they do not know anyone. And then someone comes up to them and says, hey, I am going to offer you immediate acceptance to a large social circle. All you have to do is wear a few symbols, chant a few chants, and you're accepted. Now, add to that the social media aspect, where people, especially on TikTok, which is again a Chinese government owned platform, pushing a certain narrative onto these young people. And add to that the need for people to feel like they are on the quote unquote right side of history. And you get this combustible mixture of people just willing to go with the crowd. Now, when we see those protests, what is the first thing that we see? Masks. Why are we seeing masks so in keffiyehs? Why do we see these concealment of identity so prevalent in these protests? Theoretically, if you want to show the world that you're on the right side of history, then you will show your face. So the world knows that, hey, me, Shai Davidai, I'm on the right side of history. But when you are unsure of the right side of history, then you conceal your face to leave yourself with a little bit of plausible deniability. Now, those masks then disinhibit you to actually behave in ways that you wouldn't behave naturally if you were just walking around in the world where everyone knows your face, your name, and your identifiable information. All those things together bring us to the situation that we're in today.
Yeah, you mentioned, I mean, one of the things, I know this wasn't your main point, and I think your main point was fascinating, but one of the topics I actually haven't done a deep dive ever on the podcast is this Qatar money funneling to universities. I mean, for people that have never heard of that connection before, can you just give the 2-minute Spark Notes version of, what you mean by that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd say I will caveat everything by saying I wish I could tell people more. The problem is that universities right now are not telling the world where their money is coming from. Private universities like Columbia, Harvard, Penn have been known to receive a lot of money from foreign entities, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, China, Russia, and often they do not disclose the amounts. When they do disclose the amounts, they do not disclose where that money is going to. And often they also disclose partially of the amounts, but not all of the amounts. And there are some investigations into that. Private universities are bound by other rules, but also have been dealing with a lot of stuff like that. The two main ways that universities are getting money that's funneled through these foreign entities, what I call foreign interference in American academia, is one, through different grants, research grants that establish programs in the universities, establish professorships at the universities, etc. And the other thing is that the universities themselves build campuses at those countries, in those countries, right? So, for example, name any of the top 10 universities in the United States. They probably have a campus in Shanghai. They probably have a campus in Dubai. They probably have a campus in multiple non-democratic countries. They do not have campuses in democratic countries. Now, the idea was we'll build a campus in a non-democratic country, we'll export democracy. But in reality, they're not exporting democracy, they're importing lack of tolerance, they're importing totalitarianism, they're importing specific views they may clash with American democracy.
Yeah, I think that's shocking. And just, I mean, I think, there was an interesting report. I mean, this is already back a year ago, the amount of money that countries like China, India, Russia are spending towards misinformation. In the case of India, it's really interesting. India doesn't even really care ideologically one way or another. They're just basically selling misinformation to other countries. So there was this report, I think that it was The Atlantic, did this whole report on these troll farms in India that are basically being bought by, Chinese or Russian companies. So China is buying or renting a India-based troll farm to just sow misinformation about everything from, obviously the election to everything happening in America with, pick your favorite debate, immigration, and all these things, all the way to Israel-Palestine. And so there's just so much muck there, both, as you said, at the universities and also where most people get their news, which is not, sitting in a political science class, which is obviously social media and TikTok. Let me ask you a question that might get me in trouble down the road. I've never really been shy about any of that in my life. What's your diagnosis or opinion of how helpful or hurtful the liberal Jewish community has been, specifically Hillel? I know that Hillel, has gotten a lot of mixed reviews by different people on campus. Hillel always, as sort of the flagship liberal Jewish, group on college campuses. Obviously, people have a lot of opinions about Hillel, from Hillel's too right-wing and too pro-Israel by some students and faculty, all the way to, Hillel doesn't do enough, and they're sort of, the sort of weak, downtrodden Jew for people that are more on the right. I mean, you don't have to speak specifically. I have some actually good friends who work at Columbia Hillel, so we don't have to go there specifically, but what's your sort of diagnosis of, has the liberal Jewish community, Hillel, the ADL, those institutions that, have tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, what have they done right? What have they done wrong? And, how have you, I guess, worked as somebody who has taken a stand that tends to be a little bit more bold than I would say these organizations tend to want to go? I'm just curious what that interaction's been.
Well, okay, so that's a very broad question. Let me, we can talk about the liberal Jewish institutions in general. I actually don't know if Hillel falls under this liberal Jewish institution. It is a Jewish institution. I don't know what its values are. It obviously more liberal.
Which is sad, by the way. I just want to flag that because I know a lot of people that listen to this podcast are other Hillel professionals at other campuses. The fact that how many years have you been at Columbia?
I've been 5 years at Columbia, 15 years in American universities.
Okay, well, it's sad. I mean, it's hurtful to me that you don't know what Hillel's values are. I mean, I think that's bad for Hillel.
I mean, I know in the sense that we don't have a Shammai, chapter in every. So I know it's more liberal than if we had a Shammai chapter, but I don't know where it stands on the American, ideological spectrum. But I always say you judge an institution by its stated goals and by its abilities. I see Hillel as the place for Jewish life, right? what does that mean? A lot of people kind of like flippantly say Hillel is a place where you meet your future husband or Jewish wife. It's where you get your Jewish kosher food. I see Hillel as the safe space for Jews on campus. And in order to create a safe space for Jews on campus, many Hillel chapters need to do the thing that they might find distasteful, but work with these administrations that are also allowing blatant Jew hatred to happen everywhere else on campus, right? Now, I cannot judge Hillel for not taking a bolder stance against the universities that to which they are to which they're shackled, right? The only reason of existence for Hillel is the university. So you have to work, hand in hand, even with administrations that you dislike. At the same time, while Hillel's as official organizations cannot, or probably in many cases will not take bold stances, that doesn't mean that within the Hillel buildings and chapters and organizations, we cannot have the foundation of other or Jewish student-led organizations that will take a bolder stance, right? So what I would love to see happening is, on the one hand, Hillel's creating a pure, clear, safe for Zionist Jews, and we can talk about that because there's some Hillels that are questionable in that regard. But at the same time, also provide students with the tools, the educational tools, the operational tools to create more grassroots movements that will actually demand change in the universities.
I love that. That was a very good diplomatic answer.
No,
So
it's not diplomatic. I can tell you, I really appreciate the director of Hillel at Columbia University, Brian Cohen. I can tell you that I've spent over the past year more time in the Hillel building than in my own office because I feel comfortable there, because I am surrounded by people that I know do not hate me. And that is something that is purely needed on campus. I don't expect the Columbia Hillel to be there with me when I am protesting the university's blatant anti-Jewish stance. At the same time, I expect Hillel at Columbia and any other university to not stand in the way when I and others are there demanding change.
got it. Okay, I think that makes sense. So let's talk about your stand against Columbia. Was this a conscious decision? I mean, did you
I,
see the
I'd
protest
say
happening on October 7th and you sort of, okay, here's what I'm going to do and here's my plan? Or did you just sort of see it and you're like, what the heck, I got to go do something, and then next thing you know, you're on the news?
Yeah, so it's the latter. I'll tell you more, but I have to clarify. My stand is not against Columbia. It's against Columbia's administration. I think Columbia University has the potential to be great. It's the administration that is ruining it. Um, I definitely did not plan any of this. I tell people I was speaking at a Jewish high school a few months ago, and I told them the story of when does Moshe Rabbeinu become Moses, right? And he has a very interesting life story. But the moment that his trajectory goes from pampered prince to this advocate for the Hebrews is the moment that he sees a Egyptian slave owner brutally beating a slave, right? And at the moment, he doesn't know that he's Jewish or Hebrew. He doesn't know that the slave is Jewish or Hebrew. He probably doesn't even know that Jews or Hebrews exist. He doesn't spend much time outside of the palace, right? But he sees a wrong and he just jumps into action, right? That's it. That action then, because he kills the slave owner, he then has to run away to Midian, marries, then this whole other story ends up happening because of that one action. Did he plan that action? Of course not. but he saw something that was wrong and that he was the only person around that was willing to do something about it, and he did it. Now, I'm not comparing myself to Moshe Rabbeinu. I'm not, I don't want anyone listening and saying, oh, Shai is like this narcissistic. Not at all. But
There are a couple more miracles you'd have to perform anyway before we started fully believing that.
exactly. I can turn this bottle of wine into an water to an empty bottle of water. But but it really was this experience that I had where I saw something happening on campus that was clearly morally wrong. It wasn't a gray area. It wasn't a question of maybe in some circumstance, in this context or in other context. This was wrong. Students protesting in favor and in support of rapists rather than their victims. And I said, that is unacceptable. And when I saw that the administration wasn't doing anything, I decided to speak up. Now, in retrospect, things could have been completely different. Had I not been on October 12th in the first protest on campus, observing it with my own eyes, I may not have been so shocked into action. Maybe someone else would have. Maybe you would have been interviewing some other professor or a postdoc or a student. But that doesn't matter. That's all in the past. Over the past 15 months, all I've been trying to do is travel around and tell people, when you see something wrong, you do not wait for someone else to take a stance. You take that stance.
Yeah, I really love that. Talk to me about your Jewish identity pre and post October 7th. And, one of the interesting things I've observed, I've been on campus. We were talking before the podcast. This is my 8th year on campus. And there's always been, 2 or 3 faculty members that have been interested in Hillel, years ago, that have come to Shabbat dinner, or that, maybe would pop into a Hillel event and the students get to know. But last year, that number jumped to like 40 or 50 Jewish faculty at UC Irvine, who, we've now created this Jewish faculty affinity group. And now we have students and going to faculty's houses for Shabbat dinner. And, it seems like there was a reemergence, not just of a lot of students, where I think, both Hillels and Chabads across the country have basically doubled in size post October 7th. But for a lot of faculty, I don't know if this describes you, but just, the stereotype of what I've been seeing is, faculty who, identify as Jewish, but, maybe belong to a synagogue, but obviously, don't go every week, maybe go on the high holidays, that basically tried to completely bifurcate their identity as a professor and an academic from their Jewish identity and never tried to bring that onto campus. All of a sudden, post October 7th, there is a certain, percentage of American Jewish faculty that have sort of very much leaned into their Jewish identity and Jewish community. And maybe a lot of them are too afraid to take as bold of a stance, in terms of Israel, but have really tried to show up to Shabbat dinners. I'm curious, did your Jewish identity change pre and post October 7th?
That's a great question, a question that I keep asking myself, and a question that the answer to that question will keep evolving with time. I feel uncomfortable saying that my identity has changed, but what I think has become more focused, meaning, I typically wear glasses. I'm not wearing my glasses now. And when I look at something without glasses, it's a bit blurry. When I put on my glasses, it's really sharp, and I see exactly all the details, and I understand what I'm seeing. The thing that I was observing did not change. What changed was the way that my ability to observe it. And I think my Jewish identity in many ways is like that. I've always, from a very, very young age, have been battling with 2 very, very clear identities that felt almost contradictory to each other. On the one hand, I've always been an atheist. I have never believed in the metaphysical. My mom says that I was a 4-year-old atheist. I did not believe in the tooth fairy. I didn't believe in anything that I wasn't in the physical realm. And on the other hand, it was clear to me that I was Jewish, partially because growing up in Israel, in the only place in the world majority Jewish, it's in the water. Part of my family is observant Jews. We would do Kiddush on Shabbat. We would do all those things. So it was always this contradictory identities that were in battle with each other. And I think post October 7, they have become, both of them have become more clear to me and the vision has become more sharpened, where I'm able to see how both of them actually are not contradictory, but they go hand in hand. And I'm in this process of understanding, what does it mean to be a Jew for me? What does it mean to be an atheist Jew?
I love that. Have you ever read, this is just a complete non sequitur, but Sigmund Freud's introduction for the Hebrew version of his book, Totem and Taboo?
I have not.
It's a very specific random question, but just for listeners' background, Sigmund Freud, of course, also an atheist. He was actually anti-religious. Religion was a psychosis. Listeners that are interested can look into that. But I think in the 1920s or 30s, I'm going to butcher the date, his one of his books on religion, which was Totem and Taboo, was translated into Hebrew for the Jews that were living in British Mandate Palestine, and he writes this couple page introduction, and he essentially says, nobody can explain, or I've had a hard time explaining my connection to this community. I don't speak the language. I don't buy any of these rituals or theology, but yet I feel that essentially my identity is nothing but a Jew. And he says, maybe this is incomprehensible now, but one day I hope that through science I can understand what the essence of my identity is. So I've always loved it. It's always been one of my go-to sources about sort of this I guess, interesting facet of Jewish identity. One of the things that I've actually appreciated, once I started following you on social media, and I highly recommend listeners to find you on whatever platform of choice, is you've been putting out these really interesting things, not just about Israel, but about Judaism. I think you had one whole post about, what it means that you're an atheist Jew. For people that haven't seen that, I mean, what does that mean? Because you talked about connection to Judaism in a way that seems to run a lot deeper than one would expect if you walked into a room and you led with, I'm atheist.
So I don't know if my answer will be satisfactory to many to many people in the audience, but I was forced at some point, and actually this was before October 7th, but I was able to verbalize it after October 7th. But this kind of started before. I was forced to ask myself a very simple question. My son and daughter were born in the US. Unlike Israel, where you don't need to give much thought to their Jewishness because the entire country operates under the Jewish calendar. The schools teach you Torah and Tanakh. Unlike that, in the US, that has to be an active choice. And I was forced to ask myself, how do I make my children the kind of Jew that I want my children to be? And then I had to ask myself, well, what is that kind of Jew? And then being a professor that's not satisfied with just answers and need to ask questions is, why at all am I interested in making my kids Jewish? And this is the answer that I came up with. To me, the Jewish people and Jewish identity is like a relay race. Imagine that you wake up or come into consciousness and you find yourself in a relay race. Now, you're not the first runner. The first runner in a relay race can decide, I don't want to run. But you're the second, third, fourth, fifth, you don't know which one. And someone just handed you the baton. And you start running. Now, why do you start running? Because the baton you're not its owner. You're just handed this baton. And you have one goal, to keep running and give that baton to the next person in line. Now, you can decide if you want to run fast or slow, if you're competing or just doing this for yourself, but you have one goal, to keep the baton going. I don't want the baton to drop on my shift. And that's my view of Judaism, that we have been running this 3,000 year long race. My parents gave me a baton that was given to them from their parents, that was given to them from their parents. And my goal is to give it to my kids, and they will pass on the baton to their kids. Now, my baton might be a little bit different from your baton. For example, I do not wear a yarmulke. I have started observing some aspects of Shabbat, but not other aspects of Shabbat. Like I said, I do not believe in God, but I do say the name of God during Kiddush on Shabbat. Other people might pass a slightly different baton, but it's the same race. That to me is what being Jewish is about. Now, giving that, if do you want me, I can tell a little bit more
No,
about.
please. This is great.
I've been given that this is the reason that I've come up to why I care about being Jewish, or part of why I care about being Jewish. Now I'm forced to creating my own version of what I've been calling pragmatic Judaism. A Judaism that works for me, but also works for the community, right? It's not enough for me to say, oh, being Jewish is all about tikkun olam, and I am going to put a yarmulke in the colors of a watermelon and say that I'm fixing the world. No, it's about keeping my Jewishness, but also my community going. So it has to be pragmatic enough that other people, my children and other people will feel comfortable doing, which is why I see things like, going to synagogue, which I don't regularly go, but every once in a while I do go, not as a reason to go and praise God. Some people who believe in God will do that, and that's great. But it is the original reason of the synagogue, a Bet Knesset, a place of coming together, of congregating. That's where I go and meet other Jews, right? That's why I see Shabbat, observing some aspects of Shabbat, as an important thing, not because I think God decreed that I should keep Shabbat, but because if we all do something together at the same time, even if we're not together, then we are, and we're resting, and we are part of the community together. So for me, that's the Jewishness that I aspire to.
Yeah, no, that's really beautiful. I love it. As a complete joke, I did accidentally wear my pink kippah today in the color of a watermelon, but I hope you'll forgive me. I'm totally kidding. One of the questions, I know we've been talking for a while, and I'm sure you're busy. One of the questions I've been asking everybody, so I definitely have to get your opinion. There's this obviously meta debate that's happening in the Jewish community right now. Is this the end of the golden age of American Judaism? It obviously started with the Franklin Foer article in the Atlantic, probably at this point almost a year ago. One of the interesting asides is I've been teaching an American Jewish history class over the last couple of years. And so, we had this robust debate at the end of the semester last year in my American Jewish history class. But I'm curious, to throw that question to you. It obviously doesn't have to be black and white. But what do you think? I mean, what is at the end of, in your opinion, this inflection point in the American Jewish community?
So I will be completely honest with you. I am not totally informed about every aspect of the past 70 years of US Jewry to make broad claims about, is this the end of some golden age? In my view, it's never been a golden age. People call it a golden age, but Jews had to change their last names to be successful in the media. The most successful, prominent Jews, if you think Woody Allen, Larry David, were, the stereotypical self-hating or self-doubting Jews. Um, Jews that are observant Jews were not really accepted in academia. Not just them, but any observant, like religious Christians, religious Muslims are not really accepted in academia. I don't really see this as a golden age. I mean, we've set the bar really, really low. If the golden age is they do not want to kill us, that's not golden age. That's leaden age. That's not something that I want to aspire to. Are things going to change? I would say we are observing now something that has already been changing over a few decades. It's just out in the open. And like Rabbi Yuda Drizin, the rabbi of Columbia Chabad, said, what's better, a problem that is out in the open and you can fight it, or one that's hiding and you don't know where it will attack? Um, you know, it's I don't think it's ever been golden. I don't think it ever will be golden. The only way that it will be golden is if we create Jewish life for ourselves, not trying to be accepted by anyone else other than our community, not segregating ourselves from the other community, but the evaluation shouldn't be, does the non-Jewish mainstream media accept me? It should be, am I contributing something to Jewish life, Jewish world, Jewish history, and Jewish future?
Yeah, I like that. I feel like it's a very nuanced academic take, is problematizing the question, which I appreciate a lot. It is interesting. I mean, I think what people mean, just to sort of give the steelman defense of the idea of the golden age, that post World War II through maybe October 7th, Jews sort of were accepted as, the mainstream, liberal American community. And being Jewish not only wasn't a negative, but in some fields, it was even a little bit of a positive in terms of, the med school and the law schools and business schools and things like that. And there was really no conflict out in the open between being a Zionist and being an American. And the vast majority of, liberal Americans were Zionists. And all of a sudden now, it seems like, at least in the progressive world, which of course engulfs, much of the media, much of academia, much of, the corporations, it does seem like there's almost this forced choice that's coming between, even, just one of the things, I was 2 interviews ago, I was talking with Mark Dollinger, who is a professor at San Francisco State. He tends to be, a lot more progressive, but we were talking about, anti-Semitism within the left. And I mentioned the story of a grad student at UC Irvine who is affiliated with Hillel, has never posted anything publicly about Judaism or Israel, but she's basically blacklisted socially in her department because they know she goes to Hillel, which they know is associated with Israel and Zionism. That seems new, right? I can't see that really happening 10 or 15 years ago. So I think that's what we mean more.
I completely agree, but I do want to say something. You said that Jews were accepted as the mainstream liberal, Americans. I would say that you're right, but I would add a few words. Jews were accepted as long as they were the mainstream liberal Americans. And now, when the being liberal is not enough and you need to be progressive, Jews are no longer accepted, right? So even something as Skokie, Illinois, right? That is taken by Americans all over the country, regardless of their ethno-religious identity, as the quintessential marker of this is what free speech means in the US.
Just for listeners that don't know, this is the neo-Nazi march in Skokie.
Right. And I go around and I tell people, if your barometer for free speech is allowing hate groups to march against Jews in Jewish neighborhoods, then we have never really been truly accepted. Show me a case of true free speech where a different hate group focusing on a different minority group would be allowed to go and march within that minority group's specific neighborhood, right? So I believe that Jews in the United States have not been willing to accept the fact that their acceptance or our acceptance have always been conditional, as it's always been in Jewish world throughout history, throughout the diaspora. The only place where Jewish existence is not, or Jewish acceptance is not conditional, is where Jews can determine their own fate, which is Israel. That's it. That is why it's so extremely important to have a state of our own. So, yes, was it better? 100%. No one's going to argue that it wasn't better being Jewish in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and 90s. But that was because it fit the narrative of those that were willing to accept us. Now that their narrative or the prevailing narrative has shifted, it's no longer as good being Jewish.
That's a fair argument. I'm curious to get your diagnosis, and then I have one other question. And you go. it seems like this idea of, you have this progressive bubble or milieu where, as long as you fit in, great, but the second you contradict any of the dogmas, you're out. It seems like that has started to crack. Maybe October 7th had something to do with it, but obviously the election of Trump, the, proliferation of sort of alternative media from everything from, people like Joe Rogan to, what Barry Weiss is doing over at the Free Press to, just this whole variety of ways that people are trying to, cut out of this progressive bubble all the way even. I don't know if you saw this. I think this was announced on Monday, but Meta just officially changed its, its moderation where, for years, Meta, the company of Facebook and Instagram, said that they weren't censoring and fact checking content, but really a lot of people were saying they were, and now all of a sudden they said that they're basically done. And in some way, they're copying what Elon Musk is doing over at Twitter, which, whether or not that's a good or bad thing, we don't have to get into. But it does seem like the cultural shift is happening. One way to diagnose this, I'm sort of agnostic as to what the right way to explain this is, but the post October 7th world within the progressive bubble hit such an extreme that the majority of Americans and even a lot of these big institutions have started saying, okay, this is going a little bit out of control, right? Like something needs to break. There needs to be alternative, media, even, I'm not going to listen to NPR anymore because, they're going crazy. And so, people are defecting. There was that great interview by the guy who quit NPR after 40 years because of their refusal to publish alternative views of the origins of the COVID virus. It just seems like we've hit an apex maybe on October 7th of the progressive control over culture, and it seems like that's starting to shift in a major way where even now younger people tend to be more moderate or conservative even than progressive. I'm curious if you can touch on that just for a little bit, and then I'll have one more question for you.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's like any large social phenomena, it's multi-determined, meaning there are many different reasons why, this is starting to crack. Although we may be wrong, and in 10 years we will be completely overtaken by these progressives that will then be in leadership positions. But I would say nothing, no movement, and it doesn't matter if it's from the extreme left or from the extreme right, no movement that calls itself pure can sustain itself, because it becomes this race for extra purity. It started with gender is not binary, but a spectrum, which is something that, by the way, a gender identity, I completely agree. Sexual, that's something else, and we can argue about that. And I'm not a biologist, so I can't comment on that. But an identity, like it is. And then it became, well, there are 3 genders, then there are 4 genders. And then people were like, well, if you're not into 15 genders or 18 genders, and it just became a race toward purity. It's the same thing with everything else. If you oppose, you have to oppose Trump, and I personally dislike Trump, although like any other person, he's done some good, obviously. But if you oppose Trump, you have to oppose everything that he has done. And you cannot say one thing that he did right. Same way, by the way, that people on the extreme right say that Biden has done everything wrong, right? And it just becomes this race. If you say even one thing, like a question mark, not even maybe he did something right, but it's like, is it true that everything's wrong? You're already outcast. And it becomes this purity test. And when you hold purity tests for so long, the younger generation is going to see the older generation as impure. And when I'm saying generations, I'm not talking 25 years. I'm talking 18-year-old now looking at 25-year-old now, in the same way that the 25-year-old now looked at the 32-year-olds, right? And what do you think will happen to these 18-year-olds when the 11-year-olds are in college, right? It's just this race towards towards purity that just cannot sustain itself. That to me is something that is almost obvious, right? It's you cannot paint a world without nuance and then expect that your painting of the world without nuance to be sustainable, because someone else will come and reduce whatever complexity that you have accidentally left in your views away.
Yeah, there's also a hope that, I mean, one of the things I think in my diagnosis of the last election was conservatism is sort of the countercultural, movement now, whereas, even 15 years ago, being liberal and progressive was the cool countercultural
Yeah,
thing,
that's the pendulum, right? So there was a sitcom in the 80s with Michael that made Michael J. Fox very famous. And in that sitcom, he played like the rebel teenager. His parents were aging hippies, and he was a Reagan, supporter,
Mm,
right? And that was the cool, Michael J. Fox in the 80s, right? In the 1990s, then you got like it kind of started shifting towards the other end. So of course people are always going to go against what was prevailing before. Honestly, I just don't understand why can't we all meet in the moderate left and moderate right, which we have so much more in common with each other, and push away these extreme left wingers and extreme right wingers who have no solution to anything other than burn it all down.
yeah. Were you inclined to vote for Trump at all after October 7th?
No. I can tell you, my life is easy in a sense. I'm not an American citizen, so I cannot vote. I could not, in good conscience, vote to any one of the presidential nominees. Um, I believe that it was a choice between two very, very imperfect individuals, and I felt uncomfortable giving my name to them. Do I think that President-elect Trump is better for Israel? Yes, at least in the short term. I don't know about the long term. Do I think that Kamala Harris or whoever would have been better for women and certain minorities? Probably yes. And given that my liberalism and my Zionism are both extremely important to me, I wasn't willing to sacrifice one for the other.
Got it. Okay, so we've been talking for almost an hour. Is there anything we missed? Any other points you want to make? Anything that you're, looking into these days?
Let me just tell you, we obviously focus a lot on the negative, but there's so much positive, especially on college campuses. And that positive is hiding in Jewish circles. It's in Hillel, it's in Chabad, it's in SSI, Students Supporting Israel. We have an incredible generation of young Jewish leaders in the making. And by the way, they are identifying and making non-Jewish allies on US campuses. And while, of course, the numbers are against us, I think that if we, as a community, as a society, put all our weight behind these young individuals, at Columbia, Eden Yadiger, Lishi Baker, different other students, David Lederer, we have Shabbos Kestenbaum at Harvard, Eyal Yacobi was at UPenn, Yasmin Oheb like we have Tessa Wexler. If we put our energy and our resources uh, to back them, I don't know if we'll ever reach a golden age, if that's what we aspire to, but I think the future may be brighter.
Yes, I certainly agree. One of the definitely shining moments has been the proliferation of leadership, and I am very optimistic for the next generation of American Jewish leaders. Shai Davidai, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.